Hi, I'm Gordon McCurry. I live at 1200 Albion Road in Boulder. I'm a professional hydrologist with over 30 years of experience in groundwater and surface water hydrology matters. For the last couple of years, I've been retained by the Twin Lakes Action Group to look into water issues. As you might remember from the September hearings, I spoke to you at that time about the groundwater issues, and there have been a couple of memos on that issue that you've probably seen. I won't go into those today, but you should be aware that groundwater is very shallow. There are significant flooding risks to the homes to the east in particular. That's the Red Fox Hills neighborhood. The geotechnical investigation sponsored by the BCHA confirmed many of these things with some wells that were put in. Very shallow groundwater and potential risks of increased flooding problems due to shallow groundwater should development occur. What I'd like to talk to you today about is what the handout was you just saw. It's focusing on surface water issues and flooding in particular. To give you a background, the BCHA and BVSD properties drain to the south and to the east. This is towards the Red Fox Hills neighborhood. That's shown in Figure 1 on page 1 a little bit. The blank areas on the left would be those two subject properties, and the gridded areas would be the neighborhood, the Red Fox Hills subdivision. So anytime it rains and there's runoff, it eventually flows in that direction to the southeast. That neighborhood has a stormwater system. It was put in when the development occurred back in the 80s. And that stormwater system, as designed, was allowed under a 100-year storm, which is the standard storm, to allow flooding to encroach upon the neighbors' homes, the private properties, up to 18 feet away from the streets. And that's in the area shown in the red circle on Figure 1. That was the design plan for this, for the 100-year flood. That plan also assumed that the properties upstream of the Red Fox Hills neighborhood would remain undeveloped. That's an important point because undeveloped land, when it rains, tends to retain the water. It allows water to infiltrate slowly. When any property is developed, including these in question, their runoff occurs very quickly. In fact, on page 2, there's a simple graph showing a hydrograph. That would be the flow rate that would occur under a rainstorm event. Under undeveloped plans, that's the lower curve, and then that same storm under developed situations. The peak of that runoff is much higher, and that clearly would overwhelm the Red Fox Hills neighborhood subdivision's stormwater system. It's barely adequate as it stands. So as a result, there is going to be a need for there to be detention ponds of the stormwater runoff. This is a standard practice in development, and in fact both the county regulations and state regulations require this. The purpose of detention ponds is to retain some of that runoff so that it eventually leaks out at the historic rates, so there's not worse flooding. Under new development then, these detention ponds would need to be built in ways that are somewhat unusual. In this case, as you know, there are wetlands on the south end of the BVSD property, along the south end. Part of the current natural system, water infiltrates and then helps supply the shallow groundwater levels that sustain those wetlands. If we route the runoff water from the developed land over to the southeast, that water won't get into the ground and actually will lead to the detriment of those wetlands, create that historic drainage pattern. In addition, county and state regulations require monitoring for water quality of the runoff and testing, and if need be, treatment of that water quality. That can be a significant cost effort, and we're aware of some sites here in Gun Barrel where the costs of the water quality treatment and monitoring have been substantial. And so I know this is looking forward should development occur, but one thing I'd like you to keep in mind if you can is that those extra costs for the multiple detention ponds, the water quality treatment, sampling, things like that, will certainly drive up the cost of this development. And so a closing question is, would those additional costs make the viability of affordable housing feasible from a financial point of view on this property? Thank you.
Thank you. It's 5 o'clock. Do we want